The eWords model tries to develop a language for teachers to talk about how they're using technology in the classroom. And it's built around 5 key words: exchange, enrich, enhance, extend, and empower. And it asks teachers to think about what they're doing with technology in the classroom, both as teachers, about learners, and about how they're using it to develop creative expression in their students. So it's a model that can help teachers understand what it is they're doing now and where they might want to be moving to into the future. The eWords model first began with the Harnessing Technology initiative by the department, and it came out of their attempts to define what e-learning was. And at the time, I put together a whole number of potential definitions of e-learning. And if you talk to teachers, they talk about the power of technology to engage, enthuse, entertain, extend, enhance, empower, embed, in all sorts of different e-words. But out of those, there were 5 that really struck me as key, and those 5 have been embedded into what we call the eWords model. If you talk to teachers, and there was some other research done which generally when teachers talked about their use of technology, they were able to focus mainly on the motivational aspects. And at one time we talked about what was happening beyond motivation. How did ICT improve the learning beyond that? So the model sets out to try and create a language for talking about what we're doing with technology. And we've selected 5 of those e-words as what we think are the core ones. And at one end of that model, there's the notion of exchange, where teachers exchange one technology for another, and it's happened forever. Some of us who are older can remember Banda machines, which we exchanged for photocopiers. We've now exchanged overhead projectors for data projectors, and I suspect that will go on as technology goes onward as well. And so at one stage, the exchange is an important part of getting to grips with technology, and in many cases it makes teachers more effective and more efficient in what they're doing. But it doesn't necessarily change what's being learned. It just changes the way that learning might take place. The next level up is I think where many teachers are at the moment, which is what I'm calling enrich, which is where they're using things like interactive whiteboards and integrating sound, video, images, websites into their use of that technology, and makes the learning more engaging for the learners. And so we've got more learners, and if you talk to learners, they say they like electronic whiteboards because the images are larger, there's more sound effects, it's more interesting for them. But I suppose one has to ask the question, does it actually change what's being learned, and does it actually change the levels of attainment that comes out of that learning? And I've talked about teachers particularly, but you can look at the same thing with students' use of software, what I sometimes call the edutainment software, where more effort's gone into the sound, the whiz-bangs, than has gone into the concepts that underlie the learning, and you can see that often in drills and skills types of software. But it's a natural stage that I think many teachers go through when they're still getting to grips with the technology at an early stage. I think the next level is what I call enhance, and that's where the technology is actually enabling the teacher to deepen the learning for students by approaching things in slightly different ways. A good examples of the way that we can use software to help students understand how the Earth goes around the sun, and how the moon goes around the Earth, and how the phases of the moon change across the year. And there's some lovely software that does that modelling for you in a way that you couldn't possibly achieve without that sort of software. And that really I think helps children to understand the concepts more easily. So it actually deepens the learning. You might see it also, for example, in the use of digital video in PE lessons, where the teacher takes a video of somebody working at a particular skill, plays it back to the group immediately, and the group can then see how they can improve. So they've deepened the learning through the use of that technology. The next level in the model is the notion of extend, and we've redefined this recently to talk about extending both the content, process, and the location of learning. And this enables on the content, perhaps, for children to learn things that were previously not possible for them to learn. That could be skills, it could be particular content. If you take science examples, often the use of technology in science enables students to learn things that would be too dangerous for them to learn on their own, or too difficult for them to do without the technology. We know that more and more students are learning beyond the school. They're extending their learning beyond the confines of the school, and what we've called at the National College distributed learning, learning that's going on in the home, in libraries, from groups with friends, that's going on outside of the school. We can see some examples of this if we look at, for example, in the realms of digital video, that students are using the technology to maybe make webcams and time-lapse photography over time, so they can see a seed growing over a number of weeks, then quickly play it through and see the stages of the seed developing in a way that wasn't possible before. And they're learning new things, new concepts in this case, or new skills in using that sort of technology. I suppose what we might call the top end of the model, but I'll come back to that, is the notion of empowerment. And that's where we're putting the learning in the hands of the students themselves. Now, we might see that working in several ways. In some cases, it might be the notion of, what we say, project-based learning, where students are given a problem to solve, they work collaboratively in a group, they use the internet as a research tool, they find the information they need, they redesign a way of presenting that information in a new way for their colleagues or their peers. The other way of looking at that is the notion of personalising learning through learning platforms, where the teacher's role is to put the content, the learning pathways that students can then select according to their own ability, their learning styles, their needs, and so they've got all sorts of pathways through that. So they're empowered to make decisions about the way they're actually learning. And again, we can see that often where schools have given students a lot of responsibility perhaps, again in digital video, where they might be asked to film something and they write their own storyboards, scripting, do the filming, edit it, produce it, add the music, titles and the whole thing on a theme and a story that maybe the teacher has directed them to, or even that the students have chosen themselves. Now, I've talked about the model as in steps, but it actually doesn't work like that, because another E word is the notion of embedding. And you can ask teachers and say, well, where would embedded be? Is it when everybody in your school can enrich, or is it enhance or extend? But I think embedded is when every teacher can use all of those 5 E words, but more importantly can understand why they're using the technology. So they can say, I'm using the technology in this way, in this lesson, because I want to engage some of my hard to engage learners. Or I'm using it in this way because I want to extend the learning into areas that I couldn't go without the technology. So it's about developing the language of the use of technology. And schools, if they can get hold of video materials, or they're brave enough to video themselves and use that as the focus for asking themselves, what's the use of technology in this lesson? What is it? How is it changing the learning? We've put that model on a background, or on an axis of shallow to deep learning, with the idea that probably the exchange end of that model is fairly shallow learning, and the empowerment end of the model is much deeper, the notion that children are much more actively engaged. And we originally talked about the difference between, at one end of that model, at the exchange end, passive learning, and at the other end, active learning. But we've got a whole number of dimensions we can talk about as you move across that model, across those words, from teacher-led to pupil-led, from directed to facilitated learning, to school-based to distributed learning beyond the school, to the notion of subject-based to project-based learning. And you can layer in a whole range of dimensions across that model. The last piece of the model, which we've introduced and talked about recently, is the notion of creative expression. I think we could debate whether technology makes learners more creative, or whether it actually gives them opportunities to express their creativity in different ways. And that's another dimension of the model. So we talk about technology for learning, for teaching, and for creative expression, or creating, or creativity. So those 3 elements are core to the model. Particularly in BSF, the other challenge for schools is about building capacity. And the eWords model is a good model to use to ask schools about how you another eWord, how you enable staff to move from where they might be now with their use of technology to where you want them to be. So if they're mainly using the technology for enriching, then how do you actually enable staff? How do you build the skills and the capacity and the understanding for them to be able to use it in a much more empowered way? So you've got that issue with the staff. You've also got a similar issue with students. If you're moving to project-based technology-based learning, you need to help students to develop a whole range of digital literacy skills that's going to enable them to be active and good learners in moving in that direction. And the third E is about enabling parents to understand what it is you're trying to achieve with technology, because for most of them they won't have learnt in that way themselves. And the wider stakeholder group, you could be working with other organisations and partners about what you're trying to achieve with technology. If you're working on the Building Schools for the Future programme, then one of the challenges is about transforming learning, and one of the key challenges is about using technology to do that. This model gives you an opportunity to ask yourself, where's my vision on this model? If my vision's around the enrich and exchange end of the model, then maybe the sort of learning spaces we're going to be building are probably still classrooms. If the vision is more towards the extend and empower end, then maybe we need to be looking at different sorts of learning spaces, much more collaborative learning spaces. So we've got a means of using the model to help schools say, yeah, let's just think about technology, the sort of technology we need and how we're going to use it and the sort of spaces that might be needed. But it also then prompts schools to ask about, not just about the spaces, but about the curriculum, the role of the teacher, what sort of assessment models might work if you're moving to much more perhaps project-based learning. So it sort of will prompt schools to ask a whole range of questions about their learning, their technology-based learning.